Okay, I get it. You like trucking songs, judging from the downloads on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about trucking songs. Well, Dave and I have got enough of that for version 2 and chapter 2 of Trucking Songs. Thanks for joining us on A Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. Pour me another cup of coffee. Boy, you got that song in my head. Here we are back on A Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan, and we started out the last podcast we did talking about trucking songs, and we just cracked the surface is all we did.
Yeah, we're going into the golden era, the middle of the golden era of truck driving songs, the 1970s. Breaker 19, this here's a rubber duck.
Convoy.
You got a copy on me, Pigpen? Come on, Pigpen.
C.W. McCall.
Now, I mentioned on our last recording our last podcast that interstate highways had a lot to do with trucking songs because it opened up the United States to long-distance truck driving. And there was a tremendous increase of the number of trucks on the road after the interstate highway system was built. Another catalyst for truck driving songs, the CBs.
Oh,
when the CB came out in the 1970s, so did a whole passel of truck driving songs. And the biggest was a song called Convoy by C.W. McCall, whose real name was Bill Fries. And he was an advertising guru and wrote jingles for an advertising company and was challenged with writing a song for, I think it was a bread company, and they wanted to capitalize on the CB era. And have you heard of the group called Manhattan Steamroller?
Mannheim Steamroller.
Mannheim Steamroller. Okay, Mannheim Steamroller, like a neoclassical orchestra. Had a lot of Christmas albums.
That's when we played them, yes.
Mannheim Steamroller.
Yes.
And the director of Mannheim Steamroller was Chip Davis. And he worked with Bill Fries in that advertising agency. I believe they were in Denver. I'm not 100% sure. And those two came up with
Convoy.
The song Convoy.
What about that?
And they'd written hundreds of advertising jingles, and so they came up with Convoy.
That was so clever,
clever. Rubber Duck and Pigpen and Sodbuster, and I like the everybody had a handle, CB handle, and one of them was Suicide Jockey. And when they formed this Convoy, you know what it was? The genesis of the idea. The truck drivers were very unhappy in 1975, when Richard Nixon, the president of the United States, during the oil crisis, the gasoline situation got pretty bad, if you'll remember the long lines.
Early 70s.
Okay, Richard Nixon mandated 55 mile per hour speed limit. Yep. And that really didn't sit well with the truckers. Because, they had to make time. They had to, in order to make money.
And the enforcement of that involved what they called a bear in the air.
Yep.
And they didn't like them helicopters hovering over them either. Yeah.
And in fact, some of the truck drivers in protest would form a blockade type on the interstate. They'd slow down and they'd back traffic up for miles. But anyway, they came up with the idea of Convoy, and I think they wound up with about 100 trucks in the song in that Convoy. And Suicide Jockey
hauled TNT, didn't he?
Hauled dynamite, yeah. And Pigpen was hauling hogs.
Yeah. Would you back off them hogs?
Back off them hogs. It's getting to my sinuses up here.
It's getting intense up here.
And Pigpen wound up in Omaha, where all the slaughterhouses are.
He wrote, and they recorded a follow-up called Wolf Creek Pass.
Yeah, and there was an album called his album, yeah.
Okay, that song had some of the most Awesome lyrics in it. Earl was driving, and the fire fell out of that cigar and rolled around in his breeches leg. And I looked at Earl; his lip was curled, and his leg was fried, and his lip was curled.
And there's another song that came out, the follow-up, I guess, as far as singles are concerned, to Convoy, was the Old Home Filler Up and Keep On Trucking Cafe.
Yes.
And I love that line in there. He's looking for, first of all, I had a dog named Sloan. Sloan,
that's right.
Sloan was my dog, and he was looking for Mavis. Said Mavis was built like a burlap bag full of bobcats. And he finally got up the courage to ask Mavis for a date on one of his runs, and says, Mavis, would you like to go to the drive-in theater with me? And she said, yeah. He said, can my mom come along? So he had to take old Sloan and Mavis and Mom to the drive-in theater. And you remember the movie they saw?
No.
True Grit.
True Grit.
Yeah. We went to the drive-in and saw True Grit.
C.W. McCall. Boy, what great.
We got to go to the old syrup sopper. You know who the old syrup sopper was?
Can I guess?
Yeah.
Red Sovine.
You're right. Red Sovine.
And Phantom 309.
And Teddy Bear. And Giddy Up Go.
Oh, gosh. They were all about 5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm. Recitation type recordings.
We had very few records in the day, and we played records. Dave and I both are dinosaurs. We queued up records and played them, but we had very few records that were longer than 3.5 minutes, something like that. These Red Sovine songs, Teddy Bear, Phantom 309, all of them were about 5 minutes long. We call them bathroom songs.
Teddy Bear was a story of this kid who was confined to a wheelchair, and he, to pass the time, was on his CB radio. And in the Teddy Bear song, the truck driver connects with him, and Teddy Bear talks about the fact that his dad has passed on, and his dad took him rides in his truck, and he can't ride anymore. And then all these truck drivers eavesdropped on that conversation, and they converged on Teddy Bear's home, and all these truck drivers gave him rides. It's an emotional experience to listen to that song.
Yeah.
And then Phantom 309 is about this ghost truck driver. This fella hitches a ride with a truck driver, and the truck driver lets him out at this truck stop, gives him a dime for a cup of coffee, and he mentions it while he's in the truck stop. And it gets real quiet in there because he's not the first person that stops in and says,
Big Joe
is buying the coffee for me, and it got real quiet in there. And then the story is about the truck driver who, to dodge a busload of kids, school kids, sacrifices his life. And then in the song, occasionally a drifter will come through. No, Big Joe.
Big Joe.
Big Joe.
This cup's on Big Joe. Yeah.
And then Giddy Up Go.
An estranged father and son.
It's a truck driver, and then his wife, he comes home from one of his long runs, and his wife and little boy is gone, and he never was able to connect with them again. And he had named his truck Giddy Up Go, and the little boy would, that's all, the first words he said was Giddy Up Go. And so years later, the truck driver is going down the road, and he sees the sign on the back of a truck, Giddy Up Go. And he reconnects after all those years with his son. The old syrup sopper Red Sovine had all those hits. And we can't stop talking about truck driving songs until we talk about one called Eastbound and Down.
Oh, yes.
Smokey and the Bandit.
Jerry Reed.
Yeah.
He wrote that song for that movie like Dolly did for 9 to 5 and performed it in the movie. And same kind of identical circumstances.
And you remember Coors beer was not available in the eastern part of the United States, east of the Mississippi. And there was a lot of smuggling of Coors into the eastern United States. And that's what Jerry Reed had in mind when he wrote Eastbound and Down. He says, the boys are thirsty in Atlanta, but there's beer in Texarkana. So, we got to go get it.
Yeah.
Time's a wasting.
Eastbound and down.
Yeah.
Loaded up and trucking.
Yeah.
You
got a long way to go and a short
time to get there. You talked about it earlier on the last show, Dave, and we need to reiterate because it was some of the formative years of my radio. I was that kid who had a transistor radio stuck under the pillow and at night would pull in these long-distance radio stations that played to the truckers. And I think it deserves mentioning again in the second part of our podcast about these all-night clear channel radio stations that catered to the truckers. They had advertisements and commercials that appealed to truckers, saying, when you're in St. Louis, stop at the Flying J truck stop and have this special. And that was from some of those guys. One of them had an Asheville, North Carolina connection, and we talked about this before we went on the air. Charlie Douglas.
Right.
He was host of the all-night trucker show. It was called Charlie Douglas Road Gang on WWL in New Orleans. And that station had a reach. I could hear it fine right up here in the North Carolina mountains. And he played songs for truckers all night long. So did Bill Mack on WBAP in Fort Worth, Texas.
And, Charlie Douglas worked for Zeb Lee at WSKY.
Okay.
And, Charlie Douglas, I can't remember his real name. That was his their name. But Zeb told me a lot of stories about him. He was an embalmer.
Really?
Yeah, he embalmed for funeral homes. All of us I never did get into embalming, but all of us disc jockeys had to have side gigs to pay the bills.
John Conley, licensed mortician.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Eastbound and Down, that was a big one by Jerry Reed. And here's one you played on your radio show the other morning called Roll On Big Mama, which was along about the time that Eastbound and Down was a hit.
Joe Stampley, Roll On Big Mama.
So the 70s was considered the golden era of truck driving songs, mainly because of the CB fad. Then the truck driving songs got fewer and fewer as time went on. But as we hit the 1980s, Eddie Rabbitt had a truck driving song.
Oh, yeah.
Called Driving My Life Away.
Yes. Yes.
And in 1984, our mutual friend Ronnie Millsap had a song called Prisoner of the Highway.
I play that song still. Yeah.
Truck driving song. And in 1985, Alabama. And Roll On 18-Wheeler.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember that?
I do. I remember that.
And there weren't many female artists who had truck driving songs. Norma Jean had one. Who else? There was somebody else I noticed that had one. Leanne Womack, she had one. Okay. Not a big hit, but she recorded a truck driving song. But the biggest truck driving song recorded by a female artist was Kathy Mattea.
18 Wheels and a Dozen Roses.
Isn't that a great title?
That
18
is,
Wheels and a Dozen Roses.
And that's a great song. It really, really is.
1987 was the year for Kathy's song.
I remember Del Reeves and the girl on the billboard wearing nothing but a towel.
Who is the girl on the billboard in the field by the big old highway?
Yeah.
Wearing nothing but a towel?
Yeah.
And he also had Looking at the World Through a Windshield.
Oh, okay.
Del Reeves, yeah. And there have been several songs titled Trucker's Prayer. A couple of them very serious, and one kind of a novelty recorded by Boxcar Willie. And in his Trucker's Prayer, he's asking the good Lord to let him at least one time pass a Greyhound bus, because he can't keep up with those Greyhound buses with his truck.
I was trying to think of a Johnny Cash song that was about a mountain down near Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it was a truck driver.
Monteagle?
Monteagle, that's it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Monteagle Mountain.
Yeah, Johnny Cash.
But truck driving songs kind of faded out as time went on. But back in 1996, Randy Travis had Highway Junkie. And Jason Aldean, I guess, has the last truck driving song I remember recently, a song called Asphalt Cowboy.
Yeah.
Jason Aldean. But we haven't mentioned all the truck driving songs by any stretch of the imagination, but we've hit some of the highlights. And there are a couple of songs that I want to mention if we have time.
We do. We got time.
Okay. That instead of the truck driver doing the song, the passenger tells the story. Hank Snow and I've Been Everywhere, and Johnny Cash had a recording of that too. I've Been Everywhere, where a truck driver, this song originated, by the way, in Australia, where a truck driver picks up a hitchhiker, a drifter, and the drifter is the one saying, I've been everywhere, boys, I've been everywhere. And he goes on to talk about all the places that he's been.
Right.
And that was a huge hit. And more recently, a song called Me and Bobby McGee.
I was about to bring that up. That's exactly the scenario we sang every song that driver knew.
Chris Christopherson's Me and Bobby McGee. You know, that would have been Me and Bobby McKee if Chris had not have misunderstood Fred Foster. Fred Foster owned Monument Records and Combine Music. And Chris Christopherson, mainly because he could get a recording opportunity with Fred Foster on Monument Records, had been writing for Mary John Wilkins Publishing Company. And he went over to work for Fred Foster and write for Combine Music and record for Monument Records. But anyway, Fred had a sidekick friend that, if you're into country music, you'll recognize the name, Boodle Bryant.
Yeah.
Wrote Rocky Top along with his wife Felice, and a lot of other big songs for the Everly Brothers. Many of their hits were written by Felice and Boodle. But Boodle and Fred were best buddies, and Boodle had a secretary. Her name was Barbara McKee, M-C-K-E-E, but she was called Bobby McKee. And when Fred would visit Boodle, he'd kid around with Bobby, and somewhere in the conversation, the words "me and Bobby McKee" came out.
Songwriters.
And it stuck in Fred Foster's head. So Chris Christopherson was writing for Fred's publishing company, and he was alternating his time between flying a helicopter, Chris was, down in the Gulf of Mexico. He was a helicopter pilot, in the military. But he would work a week down in the Gulf of Mexico flying helicopters, workmen from, I think, Morgan City out to the
platforms.
The oil platforms out in the Gulf. and then he'd come to Nashville for a week and pitch songs. So Fred got him on the phone and said, I got a great title for you, Chris. And gave him the title, Me and Bobby McKee.
McKee.
And Chris misunderstood, thought he said McGee. So the song wound up Me and Bobby McGee. And he was driving back to Nashville from Morgan City, Louisiana, came up through Baton Rouge, busted flat
in Baton
Rouge. And then he said it was pouring the rain. Chris said pouring the rain. And then that's where the line came from in the song where
windshield wipers slapping time.
Yeah, windshield wipers slapping time. So there's a truck driving song, but it's told by the drifter, or drifters in this case, picked up by the truck driver. You ever do any hitchhiking?
Well, back in the day, yes.
Yeah.
When I was younger and at home, and we knew everybody that came down the road. So, yeah, you'd stick a thumb out.
Well, I started hitchhiking when I was playing football in high school, and we lived several miles out of town, and, I'd hitchhike after football practice. But small town, like you're talking about, Andrews, everybody got to know you. So it really wasn't hitchhiking per se until you got away from Andrews. Well, I was 17 years old, 18 or whatever, and I had this car, old plug of a car, and somehow the wiring got messed up in it and caught on fire, and so I was without transportation, and I was going to high school and working at the radio station in Murphy in the afternoon and dating a girl I'd met in Franklin, which is about 50 miles away from Andrews, Mountain Road, all the way from Andrews over there. And I had a buddy who also dated a girl over near Franklin.
Oh, carpooling.
And we'd, ride with each other occasionally.
Carpooling was born.
Yeah, and so I'd left word that I don't remember how I got, I guess I hitchhiked over to the young lady's house that I was dating at the time. But anyway, I left word for him with his parents to pick me up, ride back to Andrews with him. It was on a Sunday, and he usually picked me up around 8 o'clock. Well, 8 o'clock came, he didn't show. 9 o'clock came, he didn't show. 10 o'clock came, he didn't show. And those folks wanting to go to bed. And I had to get back to Andrews. And I'll go ahead and mention the name. It's Lake Shope. And the young lady's name, wonderful family, her name was Linda Shope. And Mr. Shope was the Register of Deeds in Macon County. And he offered to drive me, but no, I'll just hitchhike. 17, 18 years old and got the world by the tail.
Right.
So I remember walking down to the highway, which was right below their house, put my thumb out and got lucky. About the second car came along, picked me up. The only problem was it took me about 15 miles out that road on this moonless, dark Sunday night and dumped me out. They'd reached their destination, and so I got out there, and there's not much traffic.
At 10 o'clock on night.
Yeah, but then it's about 11 o'clock on Sunday night. So I walked and I walked and I walked. And
in the dark.
Finally, here come a car. Oh, my goodness. I put my thumb out and said a little prayer, and they stopped and picked me up. And before it was over, I was saying a little prayer, please stop and let me out. There were 4 people in the car, and I sat in the back seat. They scooted over and made room for me. I was thankful to get that ride. The Lord had answered my prayers, and then I took a sniff of something. Oh, that's moonshine I'm a-smelling. So they were passing the bottle, the jug of moonshine around. Of course, I didn't take a sip. But all of those people in that car took a sip, including the driver.
Uh-huh.
And those old curvy mountain roads,
Whoa,
you know.
Yeah.
We'd hit the shoulder of the road and then back to the middle of the road and then back on the other side of the road. And I've never done so much praying in my life.
Nor hitchhiked again.
As I did that night. Well, we got over to, there's an intersection. If you turn left, you go to Andrews, where I was going. Or you turn right, you go to Bryson City. And I made up my mind, whichever way they were going to go, I was going to go the other way.
Right.
I was going to tell them I got to get out, you know. So we got to that intersection, and as fate would have it, they were going to Bryson City. I was going to Andrews, so I got out. By this time, it's after midnight on Sunday night, Monday morning. There ain't no traffic. There's no cars coming. And I walked all the way from that intersection up to the top of the mountain. I forget how many miles I measured it one day, but it's a goodly number of miles. I walked to the Nantahala Inn. A lot of people will remember, if you're from Western North Carolina, where the Nantahala Inn is. Now, the original, the one that was there back in that day, it burned, and they built a new one. But I got to that Nantahala Inn, I thought maybe I can rouse somebody and I can call and get my dad to come after me or whatever. And I knocked on the door, no answer, no answer, no answer. And by then I'm wore out, and I had on my Sunday go-to-meeting shoes, and my feet were killing me, and dogs, I'd had to fight off mad dogs in the middle of the night, and I determined I'm just going to lay down here in the grass by the ditch here at the side of the road and go to sleep. And then I heard the sound of a vehicle coming up the mountain. And as it got closer, I thought, well, that's an 18-wheeler. Maybe he'll stop and pick me up. But it was a Trailways bus. Well, I flagged him down. I thought, I'm going to lay down in front of that bus. He's either going to run over me or stop. Well, he stopped. He stopped. And I said, I don't have much money, but I need to get to Andrews. I've had car trouble. Made up a little story there. I'd had some car trouble a couple of weeks earlier, and I told him my car got car trouble, and I'm stranded, you know. He said, sure, I'll take you. So he took me the rest of the way to Andrews, and I had to walk home from there, but that was only a couple of miles. And that was the last time, ladies and gentlemen, I ever hitchhiked, and we're out of time here on the show.
We got to get in this truck and roll on, Big Mama. Thank you for joining us on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Be sure to click the subscribe button for another episode of Hot Mic with Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.